is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. The US and China head to the negotiating table in London, trying to keep a fragile trade truce alive. Well, this just days after a long-awaited phone call between Presidents Trump and Xi raised hopes for an easing of tensions. Now, the trade dispute buffeting business between the world's two biggest economies, with Chinese exports to the U.S. plunging 35%. That's the steepest drop since the COVID pandemic. Our leaders of South Korea and Japan make their first contact since President Lee Jae Myung took office in Seoul last week, speaking by phone with a potential face-to-face meeting in the works. Beijing on the defensive, saying the entry of its warship into Japan's exclusive economic zone first followed international law after Tokyo raised alarm over China's naval reach. Still ahead on East Asia Tonight. Do Hong Kong's close links with China help or hurt the city? CNA's Mei Wong explores how the trade hub's so-called China advantage can be a double-edged sword. The US and China holding further trade talks in London today, following an easing of tensions after US President Donald Trump and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping spoke over the phone last week. Well, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and Trade Representative Jameson Greer will meet with Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng for a second round of negotiations. Just last month, officials from the world's two biggest economies met in Geneva and agreed to a temporary truce to lower import taxes on goods. But tensions re-escalated, with both countries accusing each other of violating their 90-day trade agreement. For more on this, let's go to Tan Si-hui in Beijing and Ollie Barrett joining us in London. But first to you, Si-hui, walk us through what are the two sides going to be discussing during the talks?
Well, the primary focus of the meeting is likely to center on trade issues, with a particular focus on the export control restrictions implemented by both sides. Economists are hoping to see a reset to a situation on April 2nd, which is the so-called Liberation Day, and a rollback of restrictions that were imposed thereafter. So what is on the table? Well, the U.S. is likely to call on an easing of restrictions on rare earth exports after seeing significant challenges in automotive as well as defense industries globally. Now, on the trade front, they're hoping to see a rebalance of trade, possibly putting up specific targets to reduce the trade surplus with China. Well, what's on China's mind? They're also possibly looking to call on the U.S. to relax restrictions on AI chips. They're also likely to reiterate the fact that trade and non-trade issues are inseparable. So we're looking at tariff issues, the export control measures, as well as student visa matters are all interconnected. So this comes just as both sides are hoping to get back on track following the preliminary agreement at Geneva, as well as the successful call between Mr. Trump as well as Mr. Xi just days ago.
Okay, so we know the agenda. What about the location, though, Ollie? Why London has been picked?
Well, Washington asked London if it could host these talks. Of course, geographically, it comes somewhere between the two sides. London is insisting that this is not meaning that the UK is taking part in the talks, but that it is effectively providing the venue and the logistical support required for the talks to take place. Now, the UK says that it's very pleased to host the talks, and a UK government spokesperson puts it like this: "We are a nation that champions free trade, and we have always been clear that a trade war is in nobody's interests, and so we welcome these talks," says the UK government. Now, another reason why the UK is so keen to host these discussions is partly to have such senior officials from China and the United States in the UK at a time when it wants to talk to both of those countries. Of course, there is that UK-US trade agreement that was reached last month, but still hasn't been implemented. And so UK officials, I'm sure, will be using the opportunity to try and get some time with the American officials on that issue too.
So, Sihui, we know that rare earth minerals, that's going to be one of the issues or concerns that will be raised. What are some of China's main concerns when it comes to doing a deal on that?
Well, first up, China controls the global supply and most of the global supply for rare earths. And so this is going to be a challenge because European and global firms have raised concerns over the rare earths export controls. And so China has said on Saturday through the Commerce Ministry that it will review and approve these export control measures. And so far, the Foreign Affairs Ministry said to keep a close eye on the situation just today when reporters had asked what are the expectations over the US-China meeting in London. This comes just as trade data for the month of May just came today. China's exports grew 4.8%, and it grew slower than expected due to the export control measures, as well as rare earth shipments coming nearly down by half. Imports also grew 3.4%. That's a significant drop in the month of May. So really, all eyes will be on this meeting between the U.S. and Chinese delegation in London.
Now, Ollie, we're also looking out for the UK engaging or rather holding separate talks with the Chinese delegation later in this week. What are they likely to be discussing?
The focus will likely be on trying to improve economic ties between London and Beijing, which has been a key mission for the new UK Labour-led government. We also know that the Vice Premier had talks on Sunday after arriving in the UK with the UK Finance Minister, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. We're told by China that the Vice Premier believes that both sides should maintain sustained, sound and stable development of UK-China economic relations. And also some further words from Vice Premier He Lifeng. Both countries should further deepen, he says, communication and cooperation in various fields of economy, finance and economics. And so that gives you a taste of the kind of discussions that the UK will be having in the days ahead. The UK government, as I say, under Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has been trying to boost economic ties with China while also accepting and acknowledging that at some cases, there will be areas on which the two countries disagree.
Ollie Barrett reporting live to us from London. Thanks for that, as well as Tan Sihui speaking to us live from Beijing. In other news, Japan's trade negotiator Roise Akazawa is arranging yet another visit to the U.S. this week for a sixth round of talks aimed at securing concessions for Tokyo. Now, this would be the fourth trip in as many weeks for Mr. Akazawa, underscoring the urgency ahead of a possible meeting between the leaders of both countries when the G7 summit convenes in Canada on Sunday. Now, Mr. Akazawa has stressed that protecting Japan's national interests is his top priority, more than just cutting a deal before the expiry of the 90-day tariff pause. Japan faces a 24% reciprocal tariff, as well as global tariffs impacting aluminium, steel, and automobiles. The leaders of South Korea and Japan have held their first phone call since Seoul welcomed a new president last week. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and South Korean President Lee Jae Myung discussed the importance of strengthening ties. The two sides also exploring a face-to-face summit in the near future. Mr. Ishiba has emphasized cooperation and dialogue with South Korea as key to tackling global challenges. He is set to attend the G7 summit in Canada this weekend. South Korea is not a member of the G7, but President Lee will also be present at Canada's invitation. The G7 gathering may offer the first chance for the two leaders to meet in person, signaling a new chapter in Japan-South Korean relations. Well, relations have warmed up in recent years, despite historical tensions dating all the way back to Japan's colonial rule. Now, South Korea's former president, Yoon Song-yeol, appeared in court today for the sixth hearing in his insurrection trial. This is his first public appearance since last week's election. While Yoon faces a courtroom, the legal path for current President Lee Jae Myung has taken a very different turn. A Seoul court has indefinitely postponed Mr. Lee's trial on election law charges, citing presidential immunity. Before he took office, the Supreme Court ruled that Mr. Lee made false statements during his 2022 campaign and sent the case back to a lower court. Now, Lee's ruling party is now pushing for a bill to suspend all trials against sitting presidents, a move that could be challenged in the Constitutional Court. Meanwhile, the Lee administration is moving quickly to restore order within the Presidential Security Service. The presidential office has reprimanded 5 senior officials from the Secret Service, accusing them of obstructing law enforcement during an attempt to arrest former President Yoon back in January. A presidential spokesperson said that the security team obstructed a court-authorized warrant and caused social conflict and confusion. The officials have been placed on standby. Now, coming up next on East Asia Tonight, the newly inaugurated South Korean president calls on officials to draft a supplementary budget plan swiftly to support the faltering economy. And China's deflation continued in May as fragile domestic demand drags on the economy despite a recent flurry of policy support measures. Hello again. You're watching East Asia Tonight, and it is now time for your business update with Roland Lim. So, Roland, factory gate deflation in China slowing to its worst in almost 2 years. What's behind that?
Right. Uncertainty over the U.S. tariff. That's a key factor affecting the economy, and that's also hit trade figures hard. Now, China's trade continuing to expand at a slower pace last month to touch a 3-month low, despite a temporary trade truce with the U.S. Official data show that exports grew 4.8%. That's down from more than the 8% growth seen in April on year. Shipments to the U.S. were particularly hard hit with a plunge of close to 35% on year. That's the sharpest drop since February of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic upended world trade. Turning to imports, overall, these fell 3.4% on year in May. That's much lower than Bloomberg expectations of a 0.9% contraction. The further decline highlights continued sluggish domestic demand in China. And that was borne out by producer deflation figures. Now, China's producer price index deepened to its worst level in almost 2 years in May, down 3.3% in May from a year earlier, and worse than the 2.7% decline in April, the deepest contraction in 22 months. As for consumer prices, the CPI fell for a 4th straight month in May, as a spending boost during the 2 national holidays failed to offset the drag from weak domestic demand. And analysts say deflation is expected to continue in the months ahead as consumers hunker down amid real estate weakness and as well as price wars in various industries. For more analysis on those numbers, we have Tommy Wu, senior China economist at Commerce Bank AG, on the line. Tommy, good to have you on the show as always. Now, May's exports growth slowed to just under 5% despite the tariff truce. Do you think that there's more companies rushing for shipments beforehand, or is this a case of really China losing ground to competitors?
I think the shipment or the front loading of shipment due to the tariff truce will eventually come. Perhaps there is a timing issue because the trade truce between China and the US actually happened on May 12th. So theoretically, it should boost the export growth right away. But at least from the PMI readings and also other shipment data, it shows that the transatlantic shipment between China and the US should recover to a more decent pace, at least now, and also should be for the incoming coming months again. So perhaps we will look for a better export number in the coming months. But what's interesting from today's data is, exports is probably remaining a very important growth driver, given how China's domestic economy remains weak because of the, as shown in the deflation in China.
Which industries do you think feeling the pain the most? Which exporters are? Are they managing to find new markets? How are they actually coping with their margins being squeezed?
I think, obviously those that were hit hard were the ones that ship, basically export to the US, the US being the major market. Most likely could be some of the consumer products. And then now that's one thing. And so a lot of these exporters are still trying to reroute or do trade diversion via Asia and Europe. As we have actually seen even from today's data, as you've mentioned, exports to the US dropped by 30+%. But whereas exports from China to ASEAN countries and also to Europe continue to grow by double digit. So that basically tells the story that on the one hand, yes, there are weakness in exports to the US, but there are exporters are trying to reroute in order to ship to the US or try to find new export markets. But unfortunately, that will lead to further squeeze in prices when these companies try to find new destinations for their products.
Tommy, I want to go back to the numbers. China's imports of oil, coal, iron ore, they all fell last month. Is this just a blip before Beijing's stimulus kicks in? Or could it actually point to a more persistent drag on the domestic demand side of things?
I think there are a couple of things because the prices of commodities have come down. That lead to a fall in imports in value terms. But the other thing is, as you've mentioned, the weakness in domestic demand, especially with the ongoing downturn of real estate sector, that continues to be a drag on, say, steel industry or related industries. And also at the same time, perhaps due to the basically because China has developed a more complete green energy side of things. So the demand for coal and other energy products could actually be less than in the past. Okay, so and then of course plus the weakness in domestic demand. So it's actually not very surprising that the demand for commodities will remain weak for structural and also cyclical reasons.
Well, speaking of commodities, despite the export curbs, rare earth shipments jumped in the month of May. What's that telling us about Beijing's strategy, and how quickly do you think global supply chains can actually adapt to this?
Yes, indeed, the rare earth situation is in the spotlight in recent weeks because of the basically the restrictions imposed by China when the U.S. Liberation Day tariffs basically were announced. So there were jumps in some rare earths. We don't have all the data yet, but this will remain a spotlight. And I think what China will do is basically they will continue to export rare earths based on the controls that they have, because they have already said over the weekend that they will continue to export rare earths, maybe selectively, but because perhaps China wants to use it as a bargaining chip in the US-China negotiation. And also that will affect firms in Europe and Japan as well. I think all in all, China will still try to continue to export rare earths with some export controls with it. But at the same time, the world will need to adapt to these new measures and perhaps hiccups or disruptions from time to time because of negotiations or when basically the trade relations with China get sour from time to time.
And no doubt the rare earths talks will be part of that topic when China and US have resumed their talks in London. What key signals should investors be watching out for in these negotiations?
I think at least okay. I think so. In the short term, it's hard to find immediate results. To be honest, maybe there will be more positive signals from the rare earth front because China has already said they're granting exports of rare earths, perhaps including to the U.S. But it's hard to see immediate results because the U.S. right now, some of the tension points would be on U.S. technology, especially on the AI chips and also some of the design software, in which U.S. try to restrict Chinese access, but China will still more or less want to have access to U.S. technology, no matter how limited access they can get. And at the same time, the U.S. Has concerns about China's industrial policy, in which China will hold on to because of its basically its goal to remain or develop self-reliance in innovation. So there are a lot of contentious points, and not just in trade tariffs and investment, but also in other issues such as even on Chinese student visa. So I think maybe there are positive signs on rare earth and maybe some signals about what will happen in, say, the investment or the AI chip front, maybe. And perhaps, hopefully, there will be a more clear signal about what will happen to the tariff rate beyond the 90-day tariff truce. But I guess we will see.
Well, the markets have turned slightly positive these past couple of sessions, so we shall wait and see. That was Tommy Wu, Senior China Economist at Commerzbank AG. Staying in China, authorities are reportedly trying to keep pigs slimmer and cracking down on a growing trend called refattening. Farmers have been buying market-ready pigs from large breeders and feeding them for a few months more, hoping to cash in when pork prices rise. But Beijing says the gamble is causing chaos. Analysts say the practice leads to price swings and wasted feed, clashing with China's push to cut grain use, especially amid tensions with the U.S. over soybean imports. Refattening boosts pork supply when the pigs hit the market and worsens price drops when the market is already falling. Major breeder Muyuan Food says they've already halted sales to refatteners as talk of light or tighter regulations spreads. Hog prices have fallen sharply since last year. Now, cash hog prices now hovering around 14 yuan per kilo. That's about $2 per kilo. And that's down from close to $3 or 21 yuan last August. And with oversupply and weak demand, authorities appear set on stabilizing prices in the world's biggest pork consumer, as well as slimming down China's pigs in the process. Just days into office, South Korea's new president, Lee Jae Myung, is fast moving to revive a struggling economy. He's urged his team to draft new supplementary budget, one aimed at boosting consumption and sparking a recovery. The move follows a sharp contraction in the economy earlier this year, with exports and household spending slowing, partly due to global trade tensions and U.S. tariffs. Mr. Lee also called for urgent action to tame rising prices, especially on essentials like instant noodle, chicken, and eggs, some of which have surged due to the avian flu disruptions abroad. A $9.7 billion stimulus package was approved last month, and if the president pushes through another, it would mark a major step in his promise to use fiscal stimulus, even as debt concerns grow. With prices rising and growth stalling, Mr. Lee is betting bold spending is the key to turning things around. And that is the latest in business. Otelli.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. We're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, Hong Kong's status as a global trade and finance hub comes under scrutiny as the city draws closer to China. And a salvage crew finally expected to reach a ship that's been burning in the waters off Alaska since last Tuesday. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. The US and China head to the negotiating table in London, trying to keep a fragile trade truce alive. This coming just days after Presidents Trump and Xi raised hopes for an easing of tensions after a phone call. The trade dispute buffeting business between the world's two biggest economies, with Chinese exports to the US plunging 35%, the steepest drop since the COVID pandemic. Leaders of South Korea and Japan make their first contact since President Lee Jae Myung took office in Seoul last week, speaking by phone with a potential face-to-face meeting in the works. Mainland China has steadily increased its control of Hong Kong since the national security law was introduced in 2020. Beijing has also increased efforts to connect special administrative region more closely to the mainland, both economically and socially. But as CNA's Mei Wong reports, with the US-China rivalry deepening, being so close to the mainland has posed challenges for the city.
You've seen such an anti-mold sticker in your new shoebox. This bag will prevent new garments from getting moldy during shipping. Ideas for these products were hatched from Martin Berman's global head office in Hong Kong and manufactured in China. Today, the company sells 3.5 billion product items a year with $100 million annual turnover.
China can't be beat. That's where you need to be. There's an endless supply of everything in China. So here, if we have to see a customer urgently, many of our customers is just a couple of hours away. Our distant customers may be 5 hours away on a high-speed train. So if we have to see them today or latest tomorrow, it's a pretty simple thing.
But the proximity to mainland China doesn't always work in Hong Kong's favor. There's been growing competition from mainland cities. And amid the growing rivalry between the US and China, Hong Kong's status as a global trade and finance hub has also come under scrutiny.
I'm not so worried about uncertainty or risks, but I am more concerned about awareness within the city about how we should move on. And the understanding about why we lost businesses to other places. And I'm also concerned about how foreigners see Hong Kong, which may not be neutral, which may not be balanced. And this is up to us to tell a more neutral and more fact-based story about Hong Kong.
From 2019 to 2023, the number of regional headquarters of multinational companies based in Hong Kong has dropped 13% according to official data. By the end of 2023, the number of staff employed by these firms in Hong Kong had fallen by 32%, dropping to just 132,000. In recent years, the city has made a concerted effort to win back businesses. It's setting its sights on Middle Eastern and Southeast Asian corporations, pitching the city as a springboard into the larger China consumer market. These steps have begun to show results. Hong Kong said last year it attracted almost 10,000 companies with parent firms located overseas. This is a 10% increase compared to 2023. A Hong Kong government survey last year found that foreign companies that chose Hong Kong to base their regional offices cited reasons such as a simple tax system, low tax rate, and also for the city's free port status. Now, this city believes that despite the geopolitical headwinds, businesses are pragmatic, as they'll be able to see the benefits of how global and China advantages can all be found in a single economy right here in Hong Kong. But as the US-China rivalry intensifies, doubling down on its China advantage may be the most viable path forward for Hong Kong, even if it comes at the cost of diluting its status as a global hub.
If the world is still interested in the Chinese market, then Hong Kong can still be a greater China headquarter in that essence. So I think it really depends on which sector it is. For trade, definitely it would be very difficult. For finance, if anyone wants to take advantage of the liquidity here or get access to Chinese investors, it's still a very good place. But in general, definitely the attractiveness may be lower than before, and the challenges would be more.
Mei Wong, CNA, Hong Kong.
China has defended the voyage of its aircraft carrier near Japan's easternmost island over the weekend, saying it complies with international law.
中国军舰在有关海域活动，完全符合国际法和国际惯例。中方一贯奉行防御性国防政策，希望日方客观理性看待。
Beijing was responding to Tokyo's claim that the Chinese vessels sailed within Japan's exclusive economic zone. Well, the voyage prompted concerns in Japan over Beijing's expanding naval reach. Tokyo says that aircraft carrier Liaoning, along with other vessels, entered the country's EEZ, some 300 kilometers away from Japan's easternmost island of Minami Torishima, before exiting to conduct drills involving fighter jets yesterday. Tokyo believes Beijing is seeking to boost its ability to conduct operations in distant areas. Just last month, the Liaoning sailed between two southern Japanese islands, also within the country's EEZ. Another similar incident occurred in September when it briefly entered Japan's contiguous waters. Now, that's an area of up to 24 nautical miles from its coast. A salvage crew is expected to arrive today at the location of a cargo ship that caught fire off Alaska's Aleutian Island chain. Well, the vessel carrying electric vehicles has been left burning since last Tuesday on fears that the lithium-ion batteries could explode. Well, specialists armed with special firefighting equipment will assess the condition of Morning Midas, last said to be some 500 kilometers southwest of Adak Island. The cargo ship was traveling from China's Yantao to a port in Mexico, carrying some 3,000 vehicles from several Chinese automakers. About 70 are fully electric and nearly 700 of them hybrid. The fire was said to have started on a deck carrying the vehicles. The crew abandoned the ship after they failed to bring the blaze under control. All 22 members evacuated unharmed on a lifeboat before being rescued by a nearby merchant vessel. Separately, multiple explosions and fires erupted on a Singapore-flagged cargo vessel today as it was traveling in waters off India's Kerala state. The 270-meter-long ship known as MV Wanhai 503 left Colombo on Saturday and was headed to Mumbai. The blasts caused 40 containers to fall into the Arabian Sea and forced several crew members to jump overboard to escape the flames. 18 crew members have been rescued by the Indian Coast Guard and Navy, but 4 are still missing. Officials did not disclose what was in the containers or what caused the explosions. The UN chief Antonio Guterres says that the world cannot let the deep oceans become the Wild West. He was addressing the UN Ocean Conference in Nice, where nations will negotiate contentious new rules for seabed mining. The gathering in a southern French city will see leaders urged to commit money and provide stronger protections for the seas. French President Emmanuel Macron says the leaders have a duty to mobilize. The UK is set to announce an extension of its ban on destructive seabed trawling, extending it to more than half of protected English waters. Now, at the heart of the conference is a push to ratify a treaty on protecting ocean biodiversity, which was adopted in 2023. It only needs 30 more signatories for it to be ratified. The event will have one notable absentee, the United States. Neither the president nor any of his cabinet officials will be at the conference. Well, the summit brings together the 193 member states of the UN with a stated aim of fostering urgent expanded action to conserve and sustainably use the ocean and its resources. Ross Cullen has this report.
Well, this will be the third United Nations Ocean Conference after previous editions in the United States in 2017 and in Portugal in 2022. And thousands of ocean scientists have been gathering in the host city, the southern French port of Nice, in the days leading up to the event, trying to agree on aims and ambitions for what they would like global leaders to agree to during the conference. And they are calling for an end to deep sea mining and an end to deep-sea trawling. They would also like to see politicians adopt a precautionary approach going forward. The summit is being co-chaired by France and Costa Rica, and there will be civil society organisations present, along with advocacy NGOs and representatives from the member states of the United Nations, trying to agree on policies for ocean governance, not just in the short term, but also trying to look beyond 2030 and try to adopt a long-term approach to protecting marine biodiversity. They would also like a transformative action plan to be agreed at this summit in order to be able to provide solutions for the oceans. Now, one of the most important politicians who's going to be present is the Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He has been in France in recent days on a state visit, a reciprocal trip after Emmanuel Macron visited Brazil in 2024, and certainly both countries have been focusing a lot on the environmental side of their bilateral relations, and this United Nations Ocean Conference is certainly one of the key steps towards the next COP, which will be held in Brazil in November. Ross Cullen, CNA, Paris.
Our time now for another short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, sumo wrestling legend Hakuho confirms his departure from the Sports Association. What's his next move? And we'll tell you about the experiments that Chinese astronauts have been conducting on their space station. Stay tuned. In the U.S., the city of Los Angeles suffered a third day of protests on Sunday. Demonstrators are voicing opposition to recent immigration raids and are facing off with the law enforcement. Many protesters remain in hot spots. Clashes flared up just hours after President Donald Trump's controversial move to send in the National Guard. He has not ruled out deploying active duty Marines. The raids are part of Mr. Trump's mass deportation plans to rid America of illegal migrants. Earlier, tear gas and rubber bullets were fired as protesters clashed with the National Guard and police near a detention center. Some 300 guards are in the city with plans to increase that number to at least 2,000. It's the first time in 60 years that a U.S. president has bypassed the local governor to send in the guards. The National Guard is frequently used in natural disasters and almost always with the consent of local authorities. Well, Governor Gavin Newsom has formally requested the Trump administration to withdraw the troops, calling it unlawful and a serious breach of state sovereignty. He has also threatened legal action against the administration. In downtown L.A., explosions were heard as protesters set fire to vehicles. At least 10 people were arrested yesterday. L.A. Mayor Karen Bass says that the city's chaos is caused by the president. Mr. Trump pushed back, claiming the protesters are paid insurrectionists, threatening to send military troops in.
Well, we're going to have troops everywhere. We're not going to let this happen to our country. We're not going to let our country be torn apart like it was under Biden and his auto pen.
What's the bar for sending Marines to
the bar is what I think it is. I mean, if we see danger to our country and to our citizens, we'll be very, very strong in terms of law and order. It's about law and order.
The Los Angeles Police Department has declared an unlawful assembly in the Civic Center area.
As far as people worried about the violence that we're seeing, this violence that I've seen is disgusting. It's escalated now since the beginning of this incident. Tonight we had individuals out there shooting commercial-grade fireworks at our officers. That can kill you. And we have adapted our tactics to be able to have a chance to be able to take these people into custody and to be able to hold them accountable. We are overwhelmed.
Earlier, Asia First spoke to Philip Crowther in Los Angeles as tensions were flaring between LA police and protesters.
There have been protests for the last few hours, and also the presence of the police department from Los Angeles. You can see behind me right now, there's essentially a standoff right now between them using what we identify as rubber bullets right now and shooting toward actually a group of protesters up the road. You can see these police officers. There are hundreds of them right now on the streets of downtown LA, some on horseback as well. And they are trying to push these protesters away as much as possible. What you're not seeing here right now are members of the National Guard. They essentially have been brought in here to the city of Los Angeles to protect federal buildings, the detention center, for example, where illegal immigrants who had been rounded up by the immigration forces here in LA are being held right now. That's one of the buildings that they are trying to protect. We're not seeing them in a direct standoff with protesters, but the LA Police Department certainly is here, and you can see them wielding their so-called less lethal weapons right now. These are essentially rubber bullets that we are seeing that are being deployed here. Tear gas a little bit earlier today, but we haven't seen any signs of that over the last few hours.
Philip, I want to ask you a bit about the National Guard deployment. They are going to be there, deployed for at least 60 days. Presumably, they're going to be confronting protesters, trying to break up demonstrations and perhaps arrest some of the protesters as well. But what else are they going to be doing apart from all that?
Well, what we've seen in the past, when there have been mass protests that have turned violent in other cities in the United States, Baltimore, for example, comes to mind, or Ferguson, Missouri as well. What we've seen when there has been National Guard deployed is that they essentially protect buildings, federal buildings, be it office buildings, but also prisons, for example. They don't necessarily get into direct confrontation with protesters. As we can see here, it is the LA Police Department that is largely doing that right now. As we speak, we are seeing some of the police officers seemingly aiming towards this group of protesters that is close to us. So we're just going to get down here, but we'll continue shooting here, and we'll be able to tell you what is happening. So essentially what's being used here are rubber bullets, and this is what's making protesters run away into the distance, trying to get them away from this intersection right here. Again, you asked me about the National Guard. This is not the National Guard doing this right now. They might be asked to do so in the future. At this point, we know that there are a few hundred National Guard troops here in Los Angeles right now. There are expected to be 2,000 altogether. That at least is the order that came from US President Donald Trump. They haven't all arrived here yet. But from what we're seeing here today, things can, of course, escalate as they are right now. And maybe the federal government will believe that there will be more troops that will be needed here on the ground in LA.
Yeah, Philip, clearly a volatile situation unfolding behind you. If you need to move to a safer place, do let us know. But in the meantime, I do want to ask you about California Governor Gavin Newsom. He has formally requested the National Guard deployment to be rescinded. I mean, what do we know about that? What's the likelihood of that happening?
Well, this is a big political fight that we're seeing here, essentially, between the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, and the president of the United States, Donald Trump. The reason for this is when the National Guard is deployed, usually it is the governor of the state that decides, not the president of the United States. In this case, it was the president, Donald Trump, who decided to go over the head of the governor of California and decided to bring in the National Guard to this city of Los Angeles. The fact that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is telling the president to rescind that order, I don't think is going to go anywhere. National Guard troops are on their way into Los Angeles rather than on their way out. We'll have to wait and see, of course, whether these protests continue, whether they get worse, possibly more violent, whether they lead to more people joining these protesters in the streets. That's unknown right now.
Philip, Gavin Newsom wants control returned to him, to the state. Does he have a plan? Has he presented a plan, to the president, to stop these protests which are taking place as we speak?
No, there isn't necessarily a plan, except that the governor of California and the local authorities here, and that includes the mayor of the city, say they have enough power here. They have enough police forces, the ones you can see right behind me now. They think they have enough of them to be able to take control of this situation. They are saying they do not need the National Guard troops here on the ground in Los Angeles. What they are saying is that what the president, Donald Trump, has done is an escalation of the situation rather than helping it.
Well, away from those protests in Los Angeles, we move on to stories from media outlets in East Asia. The South Korea's Unification Ministry voices regret over the recent launch of leaflets into North Korea, the families of those abducted by Pyongyang. Yonhap News says the ministry has asked the activists to stop as it could heighten tensions with its nuclear-armed neighbor. Taipei Times reports that 2 college students have been rescued in Cambodia after they were trafficked and forced to work at a scam center. The teens were lured by an ad promising high-paying jobs. Radio Television Hong Kong reports that a union in the city has received over 100 calls for help after a restaurant group abruptly shut, with staff owed wages and severance pay. Hong Kong's food and beverage sector has been hit hard by a growing trend of locals dining out more across the border in Shenzhen. In Japanese wrestling, sumo all-time great Hakuho, also known as Elder Miyagino, following his retirement, has confirmed his departure from the Sports Association. This follows the closure of his wrestling stable last year due to a bullying scandal that involved his protege Hokuseiho, which saw him physically abuse younger wrestlers at the stable. While Hakuho may no longer be active in the Japanese wrestling circle, the former Yokozuna says he has no regrets as he moves on to a new dream of his, and that is to expand sumo wrestling to the world. Well, Hakuho moved to Japan from Mongolia at the age of 15 and made his sumo debut in 2001. He ascended the ranks, winning his first top division title in 2006 and went on to win a record 45 tournaments before retiring to coach younger wrestlers in 2021. For all his achievements, Hakuho is considered by many fans to be the greatest sumo wrestler of all time. China says that its Shenzhou 20 astronauts have conducted more than 10 experiments aboard its Tiangong space station in the past week. Some of the tests will eventually shed more light on the physiology of astronauts in space. So, for example, the collection of blood samples is seen as a crucial step to better understand changes in the crew's skeletal and nervous system when they are on long-term missions. And they also preserved samples from an aquatic ecosystem to see how microgravity in Earth's orbit affects bodily processes that can lead to bone loss. Now, astronauts were also observed for their movements and operations within the space station to further improve their comfort and efficiency. Meantime, another space mission is about to blast off. The Axiom 4 is a private 2-week-long mission that will take astronauts from the US, India, Poland, and Hungary to the International Space Station.
We won't have a lot of time for personal activities on launch day. It's pretty scripted out. We'll be getting up at a specific time, have breakfast, and then head to the Kennedy Space Center. I've told these guys it's very much a hurry up and wait kind of day.
Ms. Whitson aside, it will be the other astronauts' first time in space. They will do a practice run today ahead of the launch on Tuesday. And just like the Chinese astronauts, they will be conducting a range of experiments, such as on diabetes management in microgravity.
You may not know, but a person with diabetes can't fly in space because it's disqualifying. And not considered to be safe because we wouldn't know how their bodies would respond. And so if we have the appropriate technology to monitor the individuals, we feel that, we can open up that door and that path for a lot of folks in the world and just open up space a little bit more.
Survival training and getting familiar with emergency procedures are all part of the astronauts' routine. If all goes well, the launch is set for Tuesday morning at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And thanks for the good company on East Asia tonight this Monday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can also find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.